Okay, so today is December 22nd, 2018. Almost 2019. Okay, so we will begin with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So good morning, everybody. Okay, so we are now continuing with our study of the Anguttara Nikaya, the Book of Threes. And now we come to Sutta number 64. Some parts in the Sutta a bit strange to me. Okay, so the Sutta, the sort of the Nidana, the setting for the Sutta, the background explained. At this time, the Buddha was living at Rajagaha on Mount Vulture's Peak. And it says on that occasion, a wanderer named Sarabha had recently left this Dhamma and discipline. And then according to the commentary, gives some explanation. Okay, according to the commentary, the wanderers of other sects, the Anyatitya Paribhajika, had been puzzled by the great success of the Buddha relative to themselves. And they thought that the Buddha must have had some kind of little secret by which he was able to attract people and become his followers. And so they commissioned one of their members, this is the one named Sarabha, to sort of fake, to approach the Buddhist monks, and the Buddha himself with a kind of fake interest in becoming ordained as a monk in order to sneak into the Sangha and, to find out what's going on here. What is the trick that the Buddha is using to beguile people, to bewitch them and draw them to himself? So you go there and you find out the Buddha's secret, and then you come back to us and tell us what the secret is. And there is another sutta, much better known than this, which has a similar background story. This is a sutta that occurs in the Nidana Samyutta, in the Samyutta Nikaya, in which there's a wanderer by the name of Susima, who again is commissioned by his own cohorts amongst the wanderers of other sects to go claim that he wants to be ordained as a Buddhist monk to find out the Buddha's secrets. And in that case, eventually, after some questioning and investigation, Susima comes up in conversation with the Buddha himself, and after the discussion with the Buddha, Susima becomes convinced by the truth of the Buddha's teaching. And then he confesses to the Buddha that he had entered the Sangha. It uses the expression, I think it's Tena Pabaja, that he had gone forth as a thief, a Dhammatena, a thief of the Dhamma, in order to steal the Buddha's Dharma and bring it back to the other ascetics. Okay, but in this sutta, the wanderer Sarabha, as we will see, or as it's stated in the introduction that Sarabha has left the Buddha. That he had left this Dhamma and discipline. Okay, so this wanderer named Sarabha had recently left the Dhamma and discipline, which meant that he had disrobed and probably taken up the robes of the wanderers of other sects. And then he was going about in Rajagaha telling the assembly, I have learned the Dhamma of the ascetics that follow the Sakyan sun, and after I learned their Dhamma, I left that Dhamma in discipline. I suspect that he was probably saying a lot more that wasn't preserved in this sutta. Like there's another sutta again, which is a little bit similar in its opening. This is the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 12. It's the greater discourse on the lion's roar. In the beginning of that sutta, there's another one who had been a Buddhist monk and then had left the Buddhist order and was telling the assembly in Vesali, that he had been a member of the monastic Sangha, he had left it, and he said that the Buddha doesn't possess any kind of superhuman knowledge and vision, but he teaches his Dhamma just on the basis of his own sort of intellectual reflections. And then in that sutta, the Buddha condemns Sunakata very, very sternly and strongly. Okay, so as the sutta unfolds, a number of monks who enter Rajagaha for alms hear that the wanderer Sarabha has been making this statement to the assembly, and then when they finish with their alms round, they come back to the Buddha and they tell him what has been going on. And then they ask the Buddha to go to the wanderer's park, which is on the bank of a certain river, and then approach the wanderer Sarabha out of compassion for him. Okay, so the Buddha goes to the park of the wanderers, and he goes to the wanderer Sarabha, sits down on the seat prepared for him, and first he asks them, like this is typical of the Buddha, because the Buddha has just heard this report, so he's not going to begin immediately by reproaching Sarabha, but first he asks them whether it's true that he has been making this claim. And so he asks them, first time, Sarabha is silent. The second time, he's silent. Okay, the third time he asks them, the third time, the wanderer remains silent. And each time the Buddha says, tell me, is it true that you claim that you have learned the Dhamma of the ascetics who follow me? Then he says, if you have not learned it completely, then I'll complete it for you, I'll fill you in. But if you have learned it completely, I will rejoice. Okay, so each time Sarabha is silent. Okay, then the wanderers say to the wanderer Sarabha, okay, the ascetic Gautama has offered to give you this opportunity, so speak up. And if, again, they just repeat the Buddha's initial statement. Okay, but the wanderer Sarabha still remains silent, and the text says he's disconcerted, hunched over, downcast, glum, and speechless. He's unable to reply. Okay, now the Buddha goes on to mention, now he's going to mention three qualities that he possesses and that he claims for himself. And then if anybody denies those qualities of the Buddha, they would be unable to survive through a cross-examination. They would be unable to prevail after they were being cross-examined. Okay, so the first of this is if somebody were to say about the Buddha, though you claim to be perfectly enlightened, and yet there are certain things, certain dhammas about which you are not perfectly enlightened. Let's see exactly the words that the Pali text uses. Okay, so the expression goes, Sama sambuddhassa te patijanato ime dhamma unabhisambuddha. Okay, so Sama sambuddha is perfectly enlightened. That is the designation of the Buddha himself. And then as one who is Sama sambuddha, perfectly enlightened, it means that the Buddha has, in regard to all dhammas, he has abhisambuddha. He's fully awakened, fully enlightened in regard to those dhammas. And so what is the meaning of all dhammas here? Generally, this is taken to be the claim for the omniscience of the Buddha, that the Buddha knows everything. So that is the traditional understanding. Yeah, the way the commentary explains it, sabbe dhamma maya abhisambuddha, which means all dhammas have been understood, awakened to by me. And so traditionally this is understood to refer to the so-called sabbanyota, omniscience of the Buddha. But what is meant when the Buddha is said to know all dhammas? Does it mean that the Buddha would know back 2,500 years ago how many tables are set up in the Wuru Library on December 22nd, 2018? What do you think? No? How many ants there were in Jeta's Grove back on the day that this discussion takes place? I doubt it. And so the way the Theravada commentaries explain the Buddha's so-called omniscience, they say that the Buddha is capable of knowing whatever he wants to know, whatever he turns his mind to. And so in that case, we could understand that the Buddha would not turn his mind to things that are unimportant and unessential, but he would only turn his mind towards things that are important, that are essential. And perhaps the way I would interpret it, all dhammas doesn't necessarily mean that the Buddha knows even all, or is capable of knowing all particular facts, but maybe all dhammas could be understood in the sense of knowing all the principles that are essential to the spiritual life, like knowing all of the defilements of the mind that have to be overcome and abandoned, all of the wholesome qualities that will lead to higher states of progress along the path, to higher states of rebirth and liberation, to know all of the different realms of existence and to know the particular courses of karma that lead to rebirth in those realms, to know the intricacies in the workings of karma. Okay, so anyway, this would be the way I would understand the Buddha's being fully enlightened to all dhammas. Okay, so if somebody says to the Buddha, though you claim to be perfectly enlightened, you are not fully enlightened about these things. Okay, maybe it seems I'm making that claim, saying that back in ancient India, you didn't know how many tables would be set up in the reading room of the Chuangyan Library on December 22nd. But I don't think that that would have been included within the things to which the Buddha should have been fully enlightened. Okay, so if anybody would make this claim about the Buddha, then the Buddha says, I might question him about this matter, interrogate him, cross-examine him. Okay, when he is being questioned by me and so forth, it is impossible that he would not incur one or another of three consequences. That is, he would either answer evasively and turn the discussion to some irrelevant subject, or else he would display anger and hatred and bitterness when being questioned about his assertion, or else he would sit silent, downcast, glum, and speechless. In other words, if somebody were to make such a claim about the Buddha and then were to be questioned and cross-examined by the Buddha, in brief, he wouldn't be able to back up that claim. He wouldn't be able to substantiate it with specific examples of things that the Buddha should have known but did not know. Okay, so this claim, you could say this refers to the wisdom of the Buddha, to the Sabbanyutta Jnana, the all-comprehending knowledge of the Buddha. The next claim that the Buddha makes about himself that somebody is challenging is the claim to be perfectly liberated from the defilements. And so this claim, we could say, is underscoring the ultimate or complete purification of the Buddha's mind, the complete freedom from all the kilesas, or affliction, all the kilesas, the defilements or afflictions. Okay, so you claim to be one who has destroyed the asavas. The asavas are the taints, but you have not fully destroyed the asavas. What are the asavas? They're not coming to my mind right now. Right. Okay, so it's the craving for sensual pleasures or sensual desire. Then the second is given as the bhavasava. Literally, it's craving of existence, but it means it's given as the asava of existence, but it means the craving for continued existence. And then the third is the avijjasava, which is the defilement or the taint of ignorance. And so what makes The Buddha is the destruction of all of the asavas. And even the Buddha's enlightened disciples, the arahats, also have destroyed the asavas. So that is a commonality between the Buddha and his arahat disciples. Whereas being fully enlightened to all dharmas, that is, I would say, the unique prerogative or the unique achievement of a Sammasambuddha, a fully enlightened Buddha. Okay, so again, if somebody makes this claim about the Buddha and he were to be cross-examined, he wouldn't be able to defend his position, but he would he would incur one or another of these three consequences: answering evasively, becoming angry and bitter, or sitting silent, glum, and speechless. Okay, the third claim that somebody might make about the Buddha is that the Dhamma, the doctrine that he teaches, does not lead one who practices it to the complete destruction of suffering. And so we know that the purpose for which the Buddha teaches the Dhamma is for the complete liberation from suffering, from dukkha. And so the Dhamma is said to niyati. It leads out from dukkha. Yeah, we have the word niyati, which means near, the prefix near, which means out, and yati, goes. So the Dhamma is said to go out, to lead out towards samma dukkha kayaya. Towards samma is complete, and dukkha kaya is the destruction of dukkha. So that is the purpose or goal for which the Buddha teaches the Dhamma. And so somebody might say that this Dhamma doesn't lead out to the complete destruction or ending of dukkha. And so if somebody, of course, would make that claim, so that is the claim that the Buddha makes about the Dhamma, or about himself as a teacher of the Dhamma, and somebody might challenge that claim. So again, the Buddha might question him about this matter, interrogate him, and if he were cross-questioned, he would either try to turn the discussion aside, or else he would get angry at the person who's questioning him, either the Buddha or somebody else, and saying, "How can you question me? What is your right to question me? You should accept what I say." Or else he would just sit there, speechless and silent. Okay, does anybody recognize these three claims that the Buddha makes about himself? Has anybody seen them before? Venerable? Venerable? Yeah. So what is this feature of the lion's roar? There are two things that come within the lion's roar, the Buddha's lion's roar. Two groups of items. No. They're sets of qualities that the Buddha ascribes to himself. foremost chief bull. That's just one feature of the claim. That's almost synonymous with the lion's roar. Okay, if they're called the four Vesar Raja, which means the four types of self-confidence, or four kinds of fearlessness.
That he can go into any wrong full of aesthetic and be able to be confident.
There's a confidence in the assemblies, but there are the two sets of claims that come within that lion's roar. The first is to possess the 10 Tathagata powers. These are powers of knowledge. So knowing what's possible and impossible, then knowing the detailed workings of karma and its result, knowing my memory is getting a little rusty. Knowing the paths leading to all the different destinations. Well, there's an easy way to solve the problem. Okay, we find these in the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 12. Okay, first we have the 10 Tathagata powers. So the first is knowing what is possible and what is impossible. The second is knowing the detailed workings of karma by way of its cause and its result. The third is knowing the paths that lead to all of the different realms of existence. The fourth is knowing this world with its many elements and different elements. The fifth is knowing the different dispositions of sentient beings. Knowing those of a low disposition, a middle disposition, a superior disposition. The next is knowing the degree of rightness of the spiritual faculties of other people, of other beings. The next is knowing the ways to attain the various jhanas, liberations, samadhis, and attainments, knowing how to purify them, to attain them, and to emerge from them. So I think that's 7, I've covered 7. Then comes the recollection of past lives, the divine eye by which he can see the passing away and rebirth of beings. And then the 10th is the knowledge of the destruction of the asavas. So those are the 10 powers of knowledge, which are called Tathagata powers. Then the next group of factors are the 4 types of self-confidence, or 4 kinds of fearlessness. So the first is the ability to claim without fear of contradiction that he has become fully enlightened about all dharmas. The second is the ability to claim without fear of contradiction that he has eliminated all of the asavas. And the fourth is the ability to claim without fear of contradiction that the Dhamma that he teaches will lead one who practices it to the complete destruction of suffering. Okay, so those three are mentioned in the Sarabha Sutta, but there's a fourth one which is not mentioned. I don't know why. And this is the claim, the statement, that when the Buddha declares certain things, certain dhammas, to be obstructions for one who engages in those things, they are really obstructions, that they will in fact obstruct the person who indulges in them. So if somebody claims that even though you say that these things are obstructions, but they won't obstruct one who engages in them, so that would be an unjustifiable claim. So the Buddha has the self-confidence or fearlessness that nobody can contradict him with regard to that claim. And this claim becomes the basis for another sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. Does anybody remember what that sutta is? It's sutta number 22. It's called the Discourse on the Simile of the Snake. So in that sutta, there's a monk by the name of Arita who goes about claiming that even though the Buddha has said that indulgence or engagement in sensual pleasures is an obstruction for one who engages in them, but they're not really obstructions. And so in that sutta, the Buddha, this monk Arita goes about making that claim, and then the monks try to argue with him or to reason with him to convince him that he shouldn't make that claim. That when the Buddha says indulgence in sense pleasures is truly an obstruction for one who indulges in them, they are an obstruction. Then eventually Arita comes to the Buddha, and then the Buddha scolds him quite sternly. Okay, so these are the four grounds of fearlessness. And in the sutta that we are concerned with here, only three are mentioned. Why the fourth is not mentioned, I don't know. Okay, so let us continue. Okay, so the text continues that, it says that at this point, the Blessed One, the Buddha, has roared his lion's roar 3 times in the Wanderer's Park on the bank of this Sapinika River. Okay, so the three times the Buddha roared his lion's roar is with respect to these 3 claims that somebody can make about the Buddha. So apparently, even though the text doesn't say this, but apparently since the Buddha brings up these points, apparently the wanderer Sarabha was rejecting these claims about the Buddha, probably telling the assembly in Rajagaha, the Buddha is not fully enlightened, he hasn't fully destroyed the taints, and the doctrine that he teaches doesn't lead those who practice it to liberation. And so that seems to be the underlying subtext of the sutta. Okay, then the sutta continues and it says that after roaring his lion's roar 3 times, the Buddha rose up into the air and departed. And what's interesting, this is an interesting point that comes out of comparative studies between parallel versions of the same sutta. As I explained in the note, there's a Chinese parallel to the sutta. For those who read Chinese, it's in the Sangyukt Agama. It's sutta number 970. So this Chinese parallel just says simply, he got up from his seat and departed. He rose from his seat and departed. Okay, so if we compare these two versions, what kind of conclusion might we come to? What do you think? Say it again. Use the microphone.
Depends on the perception of whosoever is seated in front of the Buddha. Some of them may just have left their own mind and thought, oh, the Buddha has just flown away or something.
Is it really necessarily a matter of perception?
It couldn't be that he just flew away, right?
Well, that's what the Pali version says. He rose up into the air and departed. So this is showing a supernormal power.
Yeah.
Got up and departed. Whereas the Chinese version just says he got up from his seat and departed.
I think it's not between Chinese and in Pali. It's Majjhima Nikaya or Agamas actually assembled a little bit early in terms of timing. Anguttara Nikaya was a little bit later in
Which one was later?
Anguttara Nikaya is a little bit later.
Ah, that's a good point, actually.
So it's closer, timing-wise it's closer. Maybe the oral transmission
Yeah.
to get up in the air means it's still air between the chair and myself, not my feet. So if the translation may be correct, but it's subjective interpretation. My point is not the language, it's the timing of the oral transmission.
Actually, that could be an important clue into what is going on. Anybody else have any idea? Okay.
What comes to mind, Bhante, is that typically the Buddha does not like to display his powers like this.
Yeah.
Typically he depends on the Dharma, and since this guy is not accepting the Dharma,
Yeah.
he showed him.
A supernormal power.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a good explanation. Any other ideas? Okay, I give my thought. My thought is that there's probably a tendency taking place in all of the schools over time to elevate the Buddha higher and higher by ascribing more and more supernormal powers to him, which is not to say that the Buddha doesn't have these supernormal powers, or at least many of them, but the tendency in the text is to show the Buddha displaying them more and more. So it seems to me like would be a general principle, that where the text is simpler and more naturalistic, one could take it, in my opinion, as being more archaic, more original. Whereas when supernormal or supernatural elements are introduced, that could be a sign of lateness.
One day in the Pali original, what we translate Pali in the same sutta in Pali. What does it translate?
What is the Pali?
Yeah, does the English translation come out to be the same thing? Or when you look at the Pali word?
It says Vehasam Pakami. So the word Vehasam means up in the air. And then Pakami is left. So it said that he left through the air rather than getting up just from the seat and departing. Okay, so in my opinion, probably the more naturalistic version would be the more archaic, the older, more archaic version. And then the version which shows the supernormal feet would be, to me, it's a sign of a later version in which there's a tendency towards introduce more supernatural or miraculous elements. Okay, so let us continue. Okay, so then the text says that after the Buddha had left, then those wanderers gave the wanderer Sarabha, here I translated a thorough verbal lashing. And actually the texts have different versions, have different readings. Yeah, but okay, looking at this presentation here. So Vachaya is by speech, and Sati is like a sword, or a knife, or a spear, and Todaka is like stabbing. So they did Sanjambirang, would be like a lashing by stabbing him with the swords of speech, or with the spears of speech. Yeah, spear is better for Sati. And then exactly what they said, so they use, I think it's 3 similes. So they say, just as if an old jackal would think, I will roar a lion's roar, and then it would only give out a howl and yelp like a jackal. So when the ascetic Gautama was absent, you said that you're going to give this lion's roar that is criticizing the Buddha, but what came out was only like the howl or yelping of a jackal, because you couldn't back up your claim in the Buddha's presence. And then it's just like a little chick might think, I will sing like a cock, but instead it will sing only like a chick. Or just as if a bull might think to bellow deeply, and so you thought you could bellow deeply. And I think maybe the point should come out that, but what you emitted was just like maybe the little moo of a cow rather than the big bellow of a bull. Okay, and that takes us to the end of this sutta. So anybody have any questions or any thoughts or comments? Yes, please, Don. Please take the microphone.
in addition to saying that someone who claims he's not fully enlightened or hasn't fully destroyed the taints, etc., is wrong, is the Buddha also saying that necessarily they're doing that in bad faith? Because by their reaction, they're refusing to engage with him.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that he's saying a little bit more than they're simply wrong.
Yeah, actually, that is a very good point. Yeah. Yeah, what's implied there is that they're doing this in bad faith, and they're doing this for the purpose of disparaging the Buddha and sort of undercutting his status and prestige. I mean, if somebody, as we'll see in the next sutta, if somebody comes with a genuine question, are you really fully enlightened? Or I doubt that you're fully enlightened, then they're justified in expressing those doubts. But it's when somebody does that with a malicious frame of mind, that they're, well, of course, in any case, their statement could not be justified. But the Buddha's argument is specifically directed towards those who are doing this with the deliberate intention of undermining the Buddha and sort of rejecting his claim. Okay. Radha?
I'm an average simple man. Lion's roar can be, only a Buddha can make the lion's roar, is it?
Say again?
The lion's roar I have heard, made by a lion.
Yeah.
But according to this, a lion's roar can be made only by the Buddha among the human beings, is it?
That's not the case, because there are some suttas in which I know several suttas in which Sariputta makes a statement.
Oh, I see.
And then the Buddha says that this is Sariputta's lion's roar. So the lion's roar is not necessarily something that...
It should be an arahant at least, is it?
I guess so.
Okay. Thank you, Bhatt.
Okay, we'll go on to the next sutta. Okay, so this is called, the sort of name that's given to it in the register of names is Kesaputiya, but the sutta has become very widely known and very famous by way of the town, the name of the people to whom it's addressed. These people are called the Kalamas. So this is often known as the Kalama Sutta. Actually, that's a good point. His name was Alara Kalama, which suggests that Alara would have been his proper name, and Kalama probably means that he was originally a member of this community who then became a spiritual seeker and then a spiritual teacher. No, what she said is that, what I said is that one of the Buddha's teachers during his period of seeking before his enlightenment, the first teacher was named Alara Kalama. He's mentioned in the Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 26. It's the Arya Pariyesana Sutta, the Noble Quest. Okay, so his name, the name of the teacher was Alara Kalama. And so the last name would indicate the community that he came from. And so this suggests that he was originally from the Kalama clan, but later he became a spiritual teacher in the state of Magadha. Okay, what's interesting to me is that maybe before the 20th century, this was just like one little sutta in the mass of suttas that constitute the Anguttara Nikaya, and didn't have any special standing. Nobody paid any special attention to it. But then, maybe at some point in the 20th century, I don't know who was the first one to sort of draw out the sutta, but it was taken out and sort of extolled as an example of how the Buddha 2,500 years ago had anticipated the methods of maybe philosophical empiricism, skepticism, experimentalism, the psychology of personal introspection, and so forth. And so almost all contemporary writers on Buddhism will quote from the Kalama Sutta as an instance of how the Buddha had anticipated the scientific method, or how the Buddha was a kind of forerunner of the British empiricists of the 18th century, or forerunner of the American pragmatists of the 20th century. Okay, so in the sutta, the Buddha, as we see from the background, he's wandering in the state of Kosala, and he reaches a town of the Kalamas. Those are the people who live in this town, and the town is Kesaputta. Okay, so the Kalamas hear that the ascetic Gautama has been wandering and has arrived at their town, and they know about his reputation, and so they go to see him. Okay, and then they pay homage to him in the traditional way. Then, sitting to one side, the Kalamas say to the Buddha, okay, there are some ascetics and Brahmins who come to Kesaputta. They explain their own doctrines, and then they disparage and they reject and denounce the doctrines of others. Okay, then when they come, then it seems to us that their doctrine, their teaching must be true and valid, because they've criticized all of the others and they've presented their own teaching just so convincingly that we accept it. It seems so clear and reasonable to us. Okay, but then maybe a month later, another group of wandering ascetics come and they explain their doctrines, and then they disparage and they knock down the doctrines of others, including the doctrines of the other ascetics who had been visiting them a month earlier. Okay, so now we accept the teaching of the second group of ascetics who have come, but then when they've gone, a month later, another group comes, or maybe the first group comes back and says, you've been listening to the teachings of that group. Oh, they're just teaching nonsense. But we taught you 2 months ago, and our teaching, you could see, was so clear and reasonable. You should accept our teaching. And so they're getting bombarded by all of these different teachings. It's a little bit like the situation that I was facing in Los Angeles when I was living there in the early 1970s, 1970, 1971. This was the age when sort of all of the, or at least many of the different spiritual teachers from Asia started to come to the United States. And since they were coming from Asia to the US, sort of the port of entry where they would set up to start with their teachings and set up their centers, would be Los Angeles and San Francisco. And I was in Los Angeles. So there would be like one teacher comes and sets up and teaches one type of meditation, like this is the highest supreme form of meditation. Then a month later, some other teacher is coming who is the avatar, the latest incarnation of God, who's come for, the first avatar in the 1,000 years. He's coming to Los Angeles. Then a few months later, another teacher comes who claims to be the avatar. And so one after another is coming. And who does one believe? Which one does one accept? Okay, and so the Kalama say, we're in perplexed and doubt. Which of these good ascetics is speaking the truth and which speaks falsely? Okay, so one would expect that the Buddha would now say, don't listen to those other ascetics who have been here before. Listen to me. I will teach you the truth. But the Buddha doesn't say that, and this is quite remarkable. What he says is that it's fitting for you to be perplexed. It's fitting for you to be in doubt, because doubt has arisen in you about a perplexing matter. Okay, now, in the way many of our contemporaries, the contemporary writers on teachers of Buddhism, present this sutta, they present it as if the Buddha is teaching his own disciples that you should doubt me, that doubt about me is a good thing. But what has to be, and then this causes some perplexity. Why then does the Buddha mention doubt as one of the 5 hindrances that has to be overcome? Why is doubt one of the 3 fetters that one has to eradicate? So the Buddha is encouraging doubt. So this seems to be a contradiction. I think what one has to remember is that when the Buddha is teaching the Kalamas in this sutta, the Kalamas are not yet the disciples of the Buddha. They have been exposed to a variety of teachings, and they've fallen into the state of doubt, which is true, which is false. So if the Buddha were to say, don't listen to them, become my disciples and listen to me, the Buddha would be sort of putting the Kalamas in the same position. So the Buddha recognizes that the Kalamas are not yet ready to listen to his distinctive teaching. They're not yet, we could say, they're not yet proper vehicles for listening to and accepting the distinctive, unique teachings of the Buddha. The 4 Noble Truths, dependent origination, the 3 characteristics of existence. And so the Buddha doesn't teach them those distinctive teachings, dhammas of the Buddha. But the Buddha is going to use kind of upaya, skillful means, in order to prepare the minds of the Kalamas for his teaching. So we could say maybe in a sense that the Buddha he can't yet plant the seeds of the Dhamma in their mind, but first he has to plow the field, clear out the weeds before he can plant the seeds. And so he starts off by sort of clearing away the seeds or the weeds of the different authorities that the Kalamas might be relying on that are blocking them from being open to the truth. So he says, do not go by oral tradition. The Pali word here is anusava. So anusavena, it's anusava, which comes from the Sanskrit anushrava or anushravana. So that is what has been transmitted orally, and it has the special connotation of the method of transmission by which the Brahmins transmitted the Vedas. So the Vedas are a teaching that is transmitted from the elder Brahmins to the younger Brahmins. And so the younger Brahmins learn the Vedas by this process of oral transmission, anusava. It's actually also the way the Buddhists came to transmit the Buddhist texts. But here, the Brahmins would claim that the Vedas are, they use the word shruti. It's the Sanskrit word shruti, which comes from the root shru. I'm not getting the letters correct. Ah, there it is. Okay, and then the Pali word anusavana also comes, it's the prefix anu, plus the noun savana, and savana in Pali also comes from the root shru, same root. So savana is hearing, and the shruti is that which is heard. So it's taken to apply to the Vedas, and that the sense that the Vedas are revealed truth, the truth that was revealed to the ancient rishis, the ancient sages, and then were transmitted from generation to generation down to the present-day Brahmins. And so the Brahmins claim that the Vedas are shruti, that's divine revelation, and we've received this by anushravana, oral transmission. And so for that reason, we take the Vedas to be an infallible authority. So that is the first sort of ground of knowledge, oral tradition. The next is parampara, that is a lineage of teaching, of teachers. Parampara. So that is from one teacher has taught it to his pupil teaches it to the next pupil. So it's not necessarily of the status of divine revelation like the Vedas, but it's sort of the oral transmission from one teacher to the next. Lineage of teaching. Then the next is hearsay. So this is just what is heard, what is spread about as being true. Then the next one, interestingly, it uses the expression pitaka sampada. And the word pitaka, of course, is also used, applied later, at a later time, to the collection of the Buddhist scriptures. We have the Tripitaka, the three baskets or collections. And so as Buddhists, we go by the Tripitaka, we go by the Pitaka. But here the Buddha is saying, don't go by a collection of scriptures. Okay, so you could say that all of these, this group, let's use a color. These, we could say, are authoritative words, words that are taken as authoritative, external authorities. Okay, the next group we have here you could change the color. What's a nice color? Not too dark. Pink. Okay, that's nice. Okay, so these are different types of reasoning. I don't really know the difference between them. They might have had technical meanings at that time, which are not clear to us today. So one is logical reasoning. Yeah, taka hetu. So taka is clearly logic, and hetu would be a reason. So by reason of logic, naya hetu. So this seems to be kind of inferential reasoning. Akara parifitaka. So this would be reflecting upon appearances. So this would be like if you see smoke, then you reason there must be fire. If you see the ground is wet, it must have rained. And then ditti nijana kanti. So this is accepting some view as a result of meditating upon it or reasoning about it. And then the next two relate to the, would say, the charisma or the seeming confidence or the authority of the teacher. So let's give these two another color. So one is the competence, the power of the speaker, his physical appearance, his skill in speaking and so forth, his personal charisma. And the other is because you've accepted a particular teacher as your guru. So don't just follow the word of the guru out of blind faith or trust in the teacher. Okay, and then the Buddha gives the great dictum that's sort of the appeal to direct experience. He says, when you know for yourselves these things are unwholesome, these things are blameworthy, these things are censored by the wise. What's interesting, that here there is a kind of subtle appeal to authority. That certain people are considered pandita, wise ones. And so one looks to the wise to see what they blame and what they praise. So this, in a way, steps outside the range of what you know for yourselves. Okay, then you know that these things, if accepted and undertaken, lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them. Okay, so the Buddha first, he opens with that general declaration, and now he's going to lead the Kalamas through question and answer process to the conclusions that he wants them to draw, and those will be the conclusions that are in harmony with the teachings of the Brahmins. Would that be the conclusions? The teachings of the Jains? The teaching of the Ajivakas? Whose teachings? Right. So the reasoning, the question and answer process is going to lead them to, on the basis of what you can see and understand for yourselves, to a kind of what I would call a germinal or initial understanding of the basic principles of the Buddha's teaching, at least the Buddha's ethical teaching. Okay, so when greed arises in a person, is it for his welfare or for his harm? And the Kalamas had to have been pretty acute people with a pretty highly developed moral sense. Since if we have some, let us say, some of our corporate executives sitting around today, and you say, when greed arises in a person, is it for his welfare or for his harm? And meanwhile, these executives are looking at their cell phones, their messages, and making arrangements to buy up that company and to undermine their competitor here, to knock this one out of business, or communicating to their personal lobbyists to put some pressure on these congressmen to knock out these taxes and to loosen up these regulations to favor. Of course, they're going to say that, well, or at least by way of their action, they're showing that they think greed is good. Okay, so the Kalamas had to have been at least well versed in a higher standard of ethics, so they recognize greed is harmful. And then the Buddha continues, isn't it the case that when a person is overcome by greed, that they'll destroy life, steal, transgress with another's wife, speak falsely and persuade others to do the same, and that will lead to their harm and suffering for a long time? And so the Kalamas agree, yes. Okay, so then the same kind of reasoning is used with respect to hatred, and then with respect to delusion. So delusion is somewhat harder to see, to understand, but the Kalamas agree with the Buddha about this. And so then the Buddha, again, he comes now to a general argument, bringing all three of these things together. So are these things wholesome or unwholesome? They're unwholesome. Blameworthy or blameless? They're blameworthy. They're censored by the wise. Accepted, they lead to harm and suffering. And so the Kalamas come to agree with the Buddha about these points. So the Buddha has then gotten the Kalamas to agree that, well, he's gotten the Kalamas to agree with him on the basis of what they know for themselves, that they know for themselves now through the Buddha's questioning that greed, hatred, and delusion are unwholesome, blameworthy, censored by the wise, and lead to harm and suffering. And so the conclusion follows that then you should abandon them. And so here the Buddha is using a kind of moral approach or line of moral reasoning. But what he's sort of driving at by this reasoning is, what is the ultimate goal of the Buddha's teaching? In one word. Even further than liberation, further than enlightenment. It's a Pali word. Okay, nibbana. And there are suttas which define nibbana. What is nibbana? In 3 words, well, actually in Pali it's 3 compounds. In English it takes 9 words. If we leave out the. No, it's 9 words, 3 groups of 3 words. What is nibbana? 12 words if we add the. Come, I'm sure you know. Just take a wild guess. Will. Right. Why did it take everybody else so long? I gave you such a big hint. I said 3 groups of 3 words to make 9. If you add the, you get 12 words. Yeah. The destruction of greed, the destruction of hatred, the destruction of delusion. So the Buddha is leading the Kalamas in a way indirectly towards the destruction of greed, hatred, and delusion by convincing them on ethical grounds that they should abandon greed, hatred, and delusion because those states are unwholesome, blameworthy, criticized by the wise, and they lead to unwholesome types of action. Okay, then the Buddha repeats the same thing, same opening statement, and then he presents the argument in terms of, now on the positive side, non-greed, which more positively we say is generosity. Is it for his welfare or for his harm? For his welfare. Okay, without greed, not overcome by greed, the person behaves ethically. He won't destroy life, won't steal, won't commit sexual misconduct, won't speak falsely, or persuade others to do the same. And that will lead to his welfare and happiness for a long time. The Kalamas agree. Same for non-hatred, same for non-delusion. And so now the Kalamas are able to see that non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion, we could say generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom are wholesome, blameless, praised by the wise, and when accepted and practiced, they lead to welfare and happiness. So the Kalamas have seen this for themselves. And so the Buddha has now sort of directed them towards non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. Okay, so this is, you say, the first major section of the teaching, to lead the Kalamas to see the harm in greed, hatred, and delusion, and the benefits in abandoning greed, hatred, and delusion, and developing the opposites, non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. But they're still not ready for the liberating teachings of the Buddha. So now he's going to direct them beyond the purely ethical teaching towards the development of beautiful and wholesome states of mind. So this will be the teaching on the 4 Brahma Viharas, the 4 divine abodes, the 4 immeasurable states. Okay, so we have the noble disciple who's devoid of longing, that's craving, devoid of ill will. hatred, unconfused, that's delusion. So those three have been at least temporarily suppressed. His mind is unconfused, which means he has mindfulness. He has clear comprehension. He's ever mindful. So he dwells pervading all of the quarters, the whole world, with a mind of loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. So those are beautiful, wholesome states of mind. They're not yet liberation, and the Buddha has not yet given a liberating teaching, but he's taught so far the ethical teachings grounded in overcoming or suppressing greed, hatred, and delusion, and now a teaching of meditation, a samadhi teaching based on the four immeasurables, the four Brahmaviharas. He hasn't given a wisdom teaching because the Kalamas are not yet ready for it. And now the Buddha is going to show the consequences of what seems to be implied here is that one is putting aside any kind of commitment to the teachings of karma and rebirth, just sort of basing one's practice on what one could see and confirm for oneself in this life itself. And so on that basis, the Buddha says that the noble disciple who is this way, is without enmity, without ill will, and so forth, has four assurances in this very life. So the first assurance is this: if there is another world, that is, if there is some existence beyond the present one, and if there is the result of good and bad deeds, there is some working of the law of karma, then with the breakup of the body after death, I'll be reborn in a good destination in a heavenly world. Okay, so in this way, you could say that this disciple has won in both ways, that because he practices the good conduct and develops these beautiful states of mind, one experiences happiness here and now, praise by good people, and so forth. And after death, one gets a good rebirth. Okay, but somebody, a skeptic, might come along and say, well, you know, if there is no life beyond this present one, and you are observing the ethics of not killing, stealing, and so forth, and you're devoting your time to practicing the Brahmaviharas, you're wasting your time. You could be out there enjoying yourself. Join the party, you know, go out and go to the bars and drink and play around, get rich. Okay, but still, the second assurance is this: if there is no other world and no result of good and bad deeds, still right here in this very life, I maintain myself in happiness without enmity and ill will. The argument seems to be that because even though there's no life beyond the present life, and so I'm not going to get the karmic results of my good conduct in my meditation practice, but right here just from observing the precepts and developing these beautiful states of mind, I dwell happily. I dwell in happiness. So this is it's called the Ditta Dhamma Sukha Vihara, a dwelling in happiness in this present life itself. Because if you look at the people out there partying, drinking, playing around, struggling to get rich, and thinking they're enjoying themselves, but that's a kind of tainted, corrupted kind of happiness, where it's just a kind of low sensual pleasure. But when I dwell in this boundless loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity, this is a bliss far beyond those low and defiled states, kinds of pleasure. Okay, the third one is, to my mind, a bit problematic. So he has this assurance, suppose evil comes to one who does evil. In that case, since I have no evil thoughts about anybody, no evil intentions, I have the loving kindness, the wish for the well-being of others, the compassion, the wish that those in suffering be free from suffering, the mudita, rejoicing in the good of others. Since I have such beautiful states of mind, how can suffering afflict me since I do no evil deed? This seems to me problematic. Do I mention this in the note? I say that this is certainly counterintuitive, since we have the familiar case of bad things happening to good people. Even good people can, not to speak about natural disasters happening to them, but good people can still win to themselves the wrath of other people, the ill will, the malice of other people. For example, we have some of like the greatest figures in human history, Socrates, forced, imprisoned, and forced to drink the poisonous hemlock. Jesus, nailed to the cross, crucified. Probably other saintly figures, rejected, maligned. Yeah, so this one is problematic. Maybe we could discuss this later. And then the fourth assurance is this: suppose evil does not come to one who does evil, then right here I see myself purified in both respects. Okay, so the commentary says, I found this rather unclear, but the commentary says, since I do no evil, and since it is not done to me as it is done to one who does evil. Okay, but I don't quite agree with the commentary. So it seems to me that more likely the two kinds of purification are not doing any evil deeds and then developing a pure mind through the practice of the four immeasurables. Anyway, this is just a conjecture, but the original meaning is not so explicit. Okay, so then the Buddha concludes that this noble disciple, who is without enmity and so forth, has won these four assurances in this very life. Okay, then the Kalamas rejoice in the Buddha's statement, and now they're calling him Bhagava. So now you can see that they've been persuaded by the Buddha. So they agree with him, they repeat the Buddha's statement, and then now at the end, they go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and ask to be accepted as lay followers. So only at this point would they, when they go for refuge, then they become truly open to accept the Buddha's liberating teachings. Okay, I don't know if we have, maybe we could take, if there are any short questions, we could take them now, and then after the lunch we could come back and maybe have some discussion about the sutta. Okay, Asmund.
Bhante, I'm trying to remember, I believe in the Majjhima Nikaya, there's almost an identical, I'm trying to remember the name of the sutta, or if it was indeed in the Majjhima Nikaya. Does that sound familiar to you?
Yeah, there is actually a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. It's called which is a little bit similar to this, it's called the Apanaka Sutta, which I think Apanaka means without uncertainty, without doubt. It's number 60 in the Majjhima Nikaya. And what's interesting, in that sutta, the Buddha lays out these different views, specifically, explicitly, the views with which he disagrees, the view that one is the Nattika view, the view that there's no good and bad deeds, no life beyond the present one. The second is that there is one who kills and steals and so forth, does nothing evil. The one who practices generosity and kindness gets no merit. And the third is the view that everything is determined by destiny and that there's no human effort. And in that sutta, the Buddha argues that these views are wrong, and the opposite views, which he advocates, are the samaditthi, the right views.
Thanks, Bhante.
Yeah, it's number 60 in the Majjhima Nikaya. Did you want to make comment? I thought I saw the hand. I see.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, it was your
So I believe I recall you have written in your introduction to Anguttara Nikaya that the Chinese Agama equivalent of this sutra is quite different in its content.
Yeah.
Would you, is it possible to elaborate on that briefly? Or?
I haven't looked at the Chinese Agama version just very recently, but I remember, I have this in the note. In the Pali version, we have this passage at the beginning where the Buddha says to the Kalamas, you should be doubtful, you should be perplexed. Doubt has arisen about a perplexing matter. And then the Buddha says, do not go by oral tradition and so forth. In the Agama version, the Buddha says, I say that the Agama version, this is the Majjhima Agama number 16, doesn't have this passage on the 10 inadequate sources of knowledge. Instead, the Buddha immediately explains to the Kalamas the 3 unwholesome roots, that's greed, hatred, and delusion, and how they lead to moral transgressions. Then he explains the 10 types of wholesome karma. I remember, I thought I had a note here, that in the Agama, the Buddha tells the this is what I was looking for. Yeah, in the Agama version, the Buddha, when the Kalamas say that they've given rise to doubt and uncertainty, and then they ask the Buddha, which of these ascetics speak truthfully and which speak falsely, then the Buddha says, do not give rise to doubt and uncertainty. In other words, it's the opposite of what the Buddha says in the Pali version. For what reason, when doubt has arisen, there will arise perplexity. You yourselves do not have the pure wisdom to know whether or not there's an afterlife you yourselves do not have pure wisdom about what deeds are transgressions and what deeds are not transgressions. But then I remember, I don't seem to have it here. The Buddha says that I am the one who has that pure eye of wisdom. So I know what is good, what is bad, what is wholesome, what is unwholesome. Can see what are the different kinds of karma and what are the results of those karma. And so I say that in this case, it's possible that the Chinese version perhaps was edited or compiled at a later time, and so it normalizes what would have been the rather unusual statement in the original text in order to correspond with the idea of the omniscience of the Buddha.
Thank you.
If you read Chinese, you can read it for yourself. It's Majjhima Agama number 16. Okay, any further questions? Okay, then we'll break for the lunch, and then we can come back, let's say 12:30, and maybe we could have half an hour for questions. Okay, so let us end with the sharing of the merits. Okay, you don't have to distribute the sheet, you just recite. So we share the merits with the devas, the nagas, bhutas, asking them to protect the Dhamma in the world, to protect ourselves and others. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe sata anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Imina punya, no. We added another one after this now. Okay. Bhavagopadaya vichihetato etantare satakayupapanna arupaya rupicha sanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibuting. Okay, then we end with 3 half bows.